of you who don't know that, on top of the baptismal, is this setting, and it's important. And let me tell you why we did this. Oftentimes in our relationship with God, we tend to hurry, do it in passing. We're distracted. And this symbolizes that place that we go where we are to be with God. Setting aside time and having that space where we will be with Him. We're going to talk more about that this morning and what it looks like. I want to walk through a quick review of the first few weeks. And you'll see underneath the seat in front of you some note cards. And I encourage you to take notes. There's a pen there. I encourage you to take notes as we walk through today. Something that you can use during your time, during the week with God. Prayer doesn't always resolve our questions. Have you had questions before? Doesn't always resolve our questions, but with God, it can refocus our vision or change what we see. One of the examples that we gave during that time was how often we believe that we know what the right answer is, right? And so we pray asking God to move because we already know what's right, and yet what He has for us may be exactly what we need, and it may not be what we think we need. The Lord, in Psalm 145, David's cry, the Lord is near to all who call on Him, to all who call on Him in truth. And that in truth is in sincerity. He's near to those who call on Him in truth. We talked about this. We can get so focused on what we don't have or what we think we need that we miss what He is giving to us or providing for us. In our prayer the first week, what I encourage you to pray during that first week was, God, help me see what is real. Anybody have that issue where the enemy throws all kinds of things in front of you, and man, seeing what's real can be really difficult. The second week, we talked about the enemy doesn't need us to stop believing. He just needs us to stay distracted. And I think in our society, for sure, in my life, I will tell you, distraction is something I am consistently fighting, right? We try, I think, sometimes to live our Christian lives without being with God. You remember we talked about the Mary and Martha story. Now, Martha gets a bad rap, and serving, in fact, Jesus tells us to serve all over the place, right? I mean, so that serving wasn't bad. It's at that moment, what was happening in her heart. But he says in Luke 10:42, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Mary has chosen the better portion, and it's eternal. And I want to remind you that your time with God, our time with God, the things that He does as we are in His presence, as we are in His Word, as He is speaking to us and we are confiding and bringing our request to Him, what happens in that time is eternal. That better portion, that eternal, something that cannot be taken away. What Jesus is really saying is, what Mary is receiving from me is an eternal portion, and no one can take it from her. That prayer, the second week, I encourage you to pray that week, God, I am here and I want to be with you. God, I'm here and I want to be with you. The third week, we talked about how in Genesis, and you'll remember as the enemy tempts Eve, the writer of Genesis, Moses, the writer of Genesis, he is writing, and throughout the first chapter, he refers to God as Elohim. And then as soon as creation takes place and relationship happens, he changes it from Elohim to Yahweh Elohim, or Lord God. And we talked about that and how Yahweh emphasizes his personal covenant relationship, and Elohim, his power and his majesty. Many times the enemy doesn't erase God. He just wants to work at distancing the relationship that we have with him. And that week, we talked about how Jesus said, this is how you should pray. And it's not Elohim. In fact, that's what the enemy, remember when he tempted Eve? He said, why would Elohim? Why would God? He took away the Yahweh. And Jesus teaches us this is how to pray, our Father. There's that covenant relationship. Again, our Father in heaven as he teaches us how to pray. So we look at the rest of the Lord's Prayer, and the rest of the Lord's Prayer was actually different prayers in the temple they would have been familiar with. What was different is our Father. Jesus didn't discard the temple prayer. He taught his disciples to pray it as sons and daughters to their Father. And so our prayer last week is I encouraged you, and I knew it would be different, and I caught myself a number of times not praying this way, catching myself and then backing back up, but to start your prayers with Father. Stay present and let relationship come before requests. The beautiful truth is this, is that what we have been talking about is this relationship with God, this covenant-keeping Yahweh. And he desires nothing less than this personal and intimate relationship. And I want to remind you of something this morning. We're going to take communion. And he extends an invitation to join him at the table. So here's what we're going to walk through. And I want to tell you where we're going to head, and then we'll go there. God, our Father, desires to have a relationship, a true relationship with you. Let me go here for a second. There have been many times in my life where I've sat down with people over dinner, maybe getting a coffee, could be over breakfast, but I've sat down with them, and in fact, I want you to think about it in your own lives. If you look back in holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, what's part of that? Every time. Food. A table. Sharing food together. And as I was in, and this isn't exactly where we were headed. We inserted a week here. What hit me on Tuesday as I was walking through Scripture, it hit me, wait a minute. We see meals happen all the time in what Jesus did. So we're going to walk through a few, and we'll see. You guys can pray for me right now. I'm hoping I can tie this together. In my head, it makes perfect sense. At the end, we'll know, right? But I want to start with this. In Matthew 9 through 13, Jesus is calling Matthew to be a disciple. Watch. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. Now, I want to stop there for just a second. That just sounds kind of like, wait a minute. Jesus walks up, says, follow me, and Matthew's like, okay, leave my job, and off he goes, right? Now, I want to let you know that Matthew is brief. So Matthew also talks about how Peter and James were called down by the lake, right? And he just says the same thing. Jesus sees him, says, hey, follow me. And they're like, okay, here I go. If you go to Luke, what you find out is there's more to the story. What Matthew tells us is true, but there's just more. And in Luke, what you find out is, remember the whole thing with Peter, and Jesus is preaching, and then Jesus gets out in the boat, because the crowds are pressing in, he gets out in the boat, continues to preach. When he gets through, he looks at Peter and says, hey, how about we go fish? And Peter's been fishing all night, hasn't caught a thing. And Peter's like, okay, let's do it. And so they go out and they catch so many fish they can't, the two nets, they're tearing, right? Two boats. They go through that whole thing, and he comes back, and then he says, follow me. And Peter's like, okay, right? So we see here, we're not sure exactly how it happened, but Jesus, in some way, shape, or form, walks up to Matthew and says, follow me. And Matthew says, okay. Verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher, your rabbi, eat with tax collectors and sinners? This is funny. So I'm not sure exactly how Jesus heard that, but he heard that. Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Now, I read through this, and you may have missed it. This is what jumped out at me, is it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. It says, come follow me, and where does he end up? At Matthew's house eating. At dinner. At a table. And then, of course, you get the Pharisees going, why would he eat with tax collectors? And Jesus words this thing, and it's kind of this interesting phrase, but go and learn what it means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. See, one of the things that, if we're not careful, is we get stuck in the right things to do. And what he's talking about with the sacrifice is the law. They're all about the law. They're all about doing the right things. Jesus is saying, I am about the heart. I want a relationship with you. So much so that Jesus came and died on a cross, and his mercy is extended to us. What we deserve, we don't get. In the time of Jesus, tax collectors, and just to give you a little bit of context, tax collectors were awful people. So here's what happened. They had these tax farms. And what would happen is these people would bid on areas, right? And if they won the area, then they would hire people like Matthew to go out and collect taxes. They would go out and collect taxes, but anything they collected over what was due Rome, they got to keep. These were Jewish people hired by Rome to collect taxes. They were not liked. They were looked down upon. In fact, oftentimes they weren't allowed to testify in trials. They weren't involved in temple worship. They were just awful people. And there were taxes on all kinds of things. There was tax. They'd have a crossroad, right? They tax where the two roads crossed. Bridges, they tax it, right? Anything coming in, goods, anything going out, taxes, property tax. They tax everything. And so Matthew was part of this group, and so you can understand why the Pharisees would be like, wait a minute, you got this rabbi. What in the world is he hanging out with tax collectors and sinners? But Jesus says, I've come to those who need me, who are lost. So I want to keep going. And you know this. I mean, think about it. When Jesus was walking throughout Scripture, who did he do life? He was involved. He wasn't scared of the sinners. He wasn't scared of the tax collectors. Hung out with prostitutes. Right? I mean, and I mean that used in a good way. Right? I mean, unbelievable how he ministered to those who were hurting. Right? Think about it. Think about how many times you see Jesus hanging out with people that nobody else would hang out with, right? Jesus doesn't want for people to clean up. He sits down with them. Your job isn't to get clean before you approach God. Your job is to approach God, and he makes you clean. Lois and I, and we've done this many times, we'll go out to eat with people. I've gone out, had coffee with numerous people, and it's about relationship. When you are at your Thanksgiving meal with family, it's about relationship, isn't it? Your Christmas meal, it's about relationship. It's by far the thing that I enjoy most is getting to know people. I love getting to know people, to get to know their story. Can you imagine if every meal, think about this for a second. So if I were to invite somebody out for coffee or for breakfast, or Lois and I were to go out to dinner with somebody, and that whole time it was transactional. Can you imagine what that would feel like to you? Boy, Lois and Jean, they're just in it for whatever the transaction is. Or man, every time Gino asks me out for coffee, he's always wanting something, right? Transactional. What Jesus desires is relationship. We're not to be transactional, we're to be relational, and that's what he is looking. So let's keep going. You remember the story of Zacchaeus, right? Remember the story in the totally inappropriate song that we sang as children? Remember that? Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, right? Remember that? Which I take offense to. But I want to go back and look at that story. Jesus entered Jericho. This is in Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho, was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. There we are again, chief tax collector, and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down and at once and was welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, 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 here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times that amount. Here we see again Jesus hanging out with a tax collector. And what does it say? They went back to his house. Relational. At the table. Relational. Jesus isn't looking for a perfect host. He's looking for a home to fill with his presence. Jesus is not looking for a perfect host. He's looking for a home that he can fill with his presence. And as I begin to walk through this, and I want to tell you how my mind just began racing, because what my mind began racing with is how Jesus desires relationship. Picture that meal. And it hit me. Do you know the parable of the prodigal son found in Luke 15? The son squanders, asks for his inheritance, goes and squanders it, finds his way home, right? Just shame and guilt. I'm not worthy to be a servant of yours. And the father runs out and meet him. Don't miss that. Runs out to meet him. And what's the thing that he does next? Let's have a feast. Kill the fatted calf, for my son has returned.